Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber. We begin with this breaking news. Breaking news out of Washington, where the United States Senate is debating what would be, as a factual matter, the largest change and cut to the modern safety net in our time. President Trump's legislative agenda itself hangs in the balance. There are things in here that people think are very bad, big cuts to health care. There are things that Trump says are very good, but all of it drives through this budget process. We can see the Senate floor where they have been having what they call a vote-a-rama. The final vote on the budget could be hours away. There have been 2 defections already, so Republicans can actually only afford to lose a single additional vote in this round on the budget, with the deadline of the holiday barreling towards them at the end of the week. Democrats have been doing their version of resistance, however slow and grinding the process is. This is not like what we've seen out in the country with No Kings protests or even Senator Cory Booker's dramatic long speech. This is the more dry aspect of the Senate, but still a place where Democratic senators say they will use every tool and lever they have while warning about what the bill would do.
When Donald Trump says this bill won't cut Medicaid, he's lying.
This is the most deeply immoral piece of legislation that I have ever voted on.
It's only a beautiful bill if you're a billionaire or a very wealthy person.
When he says this bill will grow the economy, he's lying.
These Republicans are scared of a tweet from Donald Trump.
It's a horrible piece of legislation. People are fearful.
When he says this is the best thing Congress could pass for our country, he's lying.
Senator Schumer there giving his version of an echo or rebuttal to what Donald Trump says. Democrats say that this bill is not just a difference of views about how to manage the debt, it grows the debt, or what to do about health care. It pushes many Americans who currently have a health care off it. And for people who don't follow the Senate as closely, who are busy living their lives or even making sense of their summer, spending time with family, friends, and kids, all the normal things, well, they are about to be hit, if this thing passes, with the loss of health care. They'll find out about it sooner or later. And that's why some Democrats you heard there say the whole thing is actually immoral. Now, we'll run through just some top line numbers. This is fiscally irresponsible by any definition because it's a choice to add trillions to the debt. And the choice is made not because there's some big expensive thing that the country needs or some foreign war or obligation, but rather a decision to give multimillionaires and billionaires even more in tax cuts. As a bottom line matter, the numbers you see on your screen mean that $2 trillion will go up towards the wealthy in a way they otherwise wouldn't get. $1 trillion cut out of Medicaid, 12 million people, ballpark, losing their health insurance as mentioned, another 186 billion cut out of support for some of the neediest in our country, including people who need food assistance. Republicans trying to defend it.
It's the best product that you can produce with the votes you can get.
What do you think this means for President Trump's legacy in the second term?
Well, this is his legacy.
You can also fulfill the promise of mass deportation.
President Trump is popular, and the bill is extremely popular.
We can debate Donald Trump, indeed. If you can hear the sound of my voice, if you're in America or follow American politics and news, you probably know that Donald Trump is not a very popular figure, but has managed to get elected again, that his popularity is somewhere in the low 40s. Whether you call that very popular or not is up to you. But when it comes to the bill, it's not even close. Across the board, this is a 20-point plus gap. 59% of the country, including a heck of a lot of people who are conservative or voted for Trump, saying they already oppose this budget, which hasn't even passed yet. That's just based on what they have heard about it in the summer with a heck of a lot of other things going on. In other words, it's got to be really bad for this many people to know what's in it and tell Fox News it's this bad. I want to bring in our experts tonight. Jason Johnson, politics professor with Morgan State University, MSNBC contributor Juanita Tolliver, an analyst for us, and the author of A More Perfect Party. Welcome to both of you. Jason, they have the power. They have some momentum, the Republicans do. And so if this were a kind of traditional GOP policy bill, I think you and I both know it would have passed by now. It seems to have so much in it that even, quote unquote, even Republicans are concerned about.
That's the thing, Ari. There is too much in the bill. And most Republicans or most elected officials, their primary job is like, look, I'm trying to get reelected. And so if you have a bill that has too many potential negative consequences, even the things that they do like in the bill, they can't vote for because they're going to have to answer for the bad parts. So that's why you have people like Thom Tillis saying, look, I'm going to make a moral judgment here. I'm not going to run for reelection, because he knows he couldn't have defended this bill if he was running for reelection. And that speaks to, frankly, Ari, the larger problem that the Republican Party seems to have, which is, while they have policies that a majority of American voters said that they wanted last fall, in actual execution, nobody likes what they're talking about. And so now they're stuck with a bill with an arbitrary due date, and they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, I want you to go on, finish any other thoughts you want to share, but you mentioned Tillis. I think you might know, you could say I'm biased, but you might know that we have a pretty crack research team here on the beat, and their mind is where your mind is. So before we go any further, let's just listen to what Jason happened to mention off the top. Senator Thom Tillis, North Carolina Republican, pretty conservative, but he's still in a factual universe where kicking this many people off health care and Medicaid is a no-go. Take a listen.
What do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there? I'm telling the president that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid.
People like his constituents, people in North Carolina. We wanted to share that. Jason mentioned it because it's become this whole clash. Tillis said this was his line. He's not going to sort of be in the middle end of his career and take a vote to undercut health care for those individuals. Trump was threatening him in all sorts of ways. We all know that routine. And Tillis said, fine, I won't seek re-election, but I'm not going to sell out my constituents' health care. Wall Street Journal says it could put Trump's whole presidency at risk, opening up a seat that is another pickup opportunity for Democrats. Jason?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the problem, right? They can call it the big, beautiful bill all they want. Democrats can call it the big, bad bill. You can put yourself into whatever BBB tizzy, that you want to get into, right? You can try and spin this however you want, but people can read. And they've heard what they want to hear about this, and they don't like it. And those Republicans who know that they have to face their constituents next year, they have to figure out, what am I more afraid of? A primary by a Trump-backed candidate or getting kicked out of office in 2026? And I hope more of them make the decision that they're more concerned about the effect of this legislation on their voters than they are with something that comes from Trump.
Jason, you got more hope than me, friend. That's what I'll start by saying, because I don't have any faith in any other Republicans stepping forward and voting no on this. What the reality is, it just shows the amount of power and sway that Donald Trump's threats still have over Republicans in Congress. And I don't think there should be any question why the public has continuously declining trust in government and declining trust in Congress's ability to do its job. They are all pledging fealty to Donald Trump. They are running scared when he threatens them. And so I look at Thom Tillis. I appreciate you putting up that clip, Ari, because that would have mattered so much more if he did declare to run it for re-election, because that would have shown the people in his state that, hey, I'm standing up for you against Donald Trump, against big corporations, against the ultra wealthy. But no, I'm going to cower for the past 4 months while they've been working on this bill, and he knew it was coming his way. He didn't say the truth before now, but now he feels relieved because he doesn't have to operate under Donald Trump. But the reality is, people need elected officials who will fight for them day in and day out. And I hope North Carolina makes a better choice in this next election.
I mean, I think you both come at this with different perspectives that are interesting. In a way, I would say you're both right. Jason's talking about what it means to actually do that. And if one person can do it, can others do it? Which hypothetically is possible. Juanita, you're saying, why is defending health care or schooling or any other baseline thing the government can deliver, why is defending that such an extreme position in today's party that you have to quit over it, and you couldn't have done this earlier and for longer, that we should get more than one good vote out of people, right? I hear you both on that. I also want to show people, again, we're watching this, the Senate right now deliberating on pieces of budget. Republicans are trying this other budgeting gimmick. Speaking of the budget, Republicans want to say that if they do more tax cuts and extend the 2017 round, it's like free and you shouldn't have to count it. And this matters because we showed the polling earlier. What people learn about the underlying facts affects their understanding of it. This is a fiscally irresponsible bill. That's just a fact. The Wall Street Journal, which is, pretty Wall Street friendly, does note that that kind of trick is a $3 trillion plus magic wand, while the Times says if you go down this road, whether you call it a gimmick or outright lies, you're not going to get a very accurate process. Jason, what does it tell you that even the Wall Street Journal is skeptical, and they think if they admitted what this all really costs, they might not get the thing passed at all this week?
Ari, it reminds me a lot of Project 2025 last year, right? Like when people heard about it, they didn't like it. And so the Trump campaign spent the rest of the summer lying about what they were doing. You hear, Holly and other members of the Senate, Republicans in the Senate saying, I don't like this part of the bill, but they're still going to end up voting for it. So that is a huge problem. I don't know how you explain to your constituents that you're saying this thing is unpopular and the clear math says that you're going to blow up the budget, but I'm somehow going to sell this to you. The math ain't mathin', and most of them recognize it. Now, the issue will be, again, if that math is going to affect them at the election booth next year, but the math ain't mathin' for anybody who knows how their taxes work right now.
Juanita, I want you to both make sure that we include everyone and let us know, what does it really mean when you say something ain't something? The math ain't mathing. News is about learning. So some people might know what that means. Some people might be at home going, okay, what's he mean? So tell us what that means if you know, and then give us your other thought here.
I feel like the cultural translator right now. Okay, Ari, but it doesn't make sense for people.
I would say, wait, I'll let you finish.
Bettering it.
Wait, Juanita, I'll let you finish. I was just going to say the youth translator, because we love all MSNBC viewers, but I'm betting, I could be wrong, I'm sure I'll hear about it if I'm wrong. I'm betting if you're north of 75, that you might not have heard that one. If you're under whatever, you probably have.
Well, I think it just translates to the lies do not add up, because at the end of the day, people's lives will be negatively impacted by this bill. Now, to Jason's point about whether or not that'll matter in the midterms, I'm looking at Democrats about what explicit frame are you going to be using and beating like a drum for the next year and a half, because that needs to be front of mind for voters. You can't let them forget in that lag of time between when the policy is voted on to when it's implemented and those rural hospitals are closing, when seniors can't afford their home care aid because the Medicaid has been withdrawn from them, when children are missing meals because SNAP benefits have been cut. You need to create a clear picture for that. And I got to say, today I was truly appalled at one clip I saw from a senator who said that he's ready to go home and that he's missing a beach vacation, John Fetterman. That ain't the message that Democrats need to lean on. They need to illustrate explicitly how this is going to harm people in their districts, in their states, and make sure that that's something concrete in the minds of voters, because I don't care what your age is, you will be negatively impacted by this bill if you are not a millionaire.
Yeah, that's a wild one. I'm glad you mentioned it, Juanita. I think for this Congress, very few people would say they deserve a vacation right now, even though a lot of other people would say, we don't want them to do that much work if this is what their work looks like. A bit of a paradox. You don't deserve to go home, but we don't want you at work. Jason, when we come back, I want to ask you about whether we can say the budget isn't budgeting, or is that not the right use of the term? We're going to explore that and more, plus Elon Musk back in it. So both of our great guests stay tonight. Later in the show, Professor Murray is here, and I'm going to give my first breakdown of that ruling we got. It does help Donald Trump, but helps him because he keeps losing so much on those injunctions. And something special I want you to know we have coming up, a live interview on The Beat with a Marine Corps veteran whose wife was actually taken by ICE under these Trump aggressive policies. He is now alone with their 2-year-old son and baby daughter while their mother is held in these unusual, cruel conditions. That story's coming up by the end of the hour while I return with these guests in 90 seconds. Republicans working feverishly tonight to try to get this budget passed. Elon Musk, who until recently was part of the Trump administration, is not helping. He is saying things that are actually relevant to what is in this massive budget bill. Now, one of the reasons he has clearly been upset and was part of the falling out, according to some reporting, is that he's not getting what he wants for his businesses, that the bill doesn't do things that would continue Tesla's support within the federal budget and with all types of incentives. Now, here's what Mr. Musk is posting, quote, "The latest bill destroys millions of jobs in America, will cause strategic harm to our country." He says it is utterly insane and destructive, gives handouts to industries of the past. He obviously thinks of his companies quite differently, and goes on to say it severely damages industries of the future, the reference to the self-interest of it all. Musk, though, has money, and while his politics and activities have shifted rapidly, he, for what are pennies on the dollar to him, can fund huge primary challengers against Republicans. Jason Johnson and Juanita Tolliver are here. Juanita, one of the things that's useful about social media is how sometimes people tell on themselves. And so Elon Musk is admitting now, as he has in the past months, that he views the government as a kind of ATM, and that if he doesn't get back what he wants, money-wise, then he's upset about what he put in. Now, that's an approach. That, by the way, is not illegal. Unfortunately, many lobbyists follow the laws and work for companies that follow the laws that do this. This is the legalized graft, and so we can debate all we want. That. But what does it tell you that Musk is mad at Trump for that reason, and yet he is attacking the bill in a way that overlaps with what are also legitimate concerns, like what budget experts have said, healthcare advocates, Tillis, etc.?
Anything that comes out of Elon Musk's mouth or that he posts online is explicitly self-interested. Or you said that this was an approach. It is the approach of a self-interested billionaire who knows that he has companies that want to continue to get their businesses somewhat subsidized from the U.S. government. Of course, he's responding to the fossil fuel claims, but not because he wants to save the planet, Ari. It's about his businesses. Of course, he's talking through the things that he doesn't like, not because he cares about the people after the way he attempted to deconstruct entire systems of government through Doge. He couldn't care less about the people. This is exclusively about what Elon Musk wants to gain and hopes to gain. And I do appreciate the direct friction and confrontation that he's having with Donald Trump in terms of primary challenges for people who do vote yes on this bill. I'm like, yes, primary them from both directions, clear that space, and hopefully Democrats can step in and take advantage of this feud, this financial feud that will play out in the midterms and beyond.
Jason?
All right, this is disturbing to me because, one of the steps when you know that your democracy is failing is when it starts to look like competitive authoritarianism. Like, basically, our entire lives, the lives of hundreds of millions of Americans, are going to be an argument between the president and some billionaire that basically subsidize him. That's not how policy is supposed to work, right? We shouldn't have to care about what Elon Musk says because the senators themselves should be listening to their constituents and saying, oh my gosh, my constituents aren't happy about this. Who cares what Elon Musk says? Who cares what the guy in the White House says? And that's a larger problem to me. Whether or not he'll get his way, whether or not he primaries anyone is less disturbing to me than the fact that he's even a part of the conversation and this man isn't even in government anymore.
Yeah. A very fair point, and it reminds everyone we are dealing with multiple levels, especially right now in this current era. So you have this budget bill, which affects a lot of real people's lives. It's our top story. Then you have the open sort of smash mouth billionaire politics that you mentioned, where they admit what they're doing. They want stuff back from the government, and they admit how they do it, which is treating a lot of these members of Congress like pawns. And they refer to our completely gerrymandered, broken system where people are more worried about an obscure primary than the general election. A lot of these people in the House are in districts where that's the only thing they ever think about. And that's why it gets more extreme. So a little political science with our politics. Jason and Juanita, thanks to both of you.
Thanks, Ari.
Thanks, Ari.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot. We're going to fit in a break. The Supreme Court decision that came down on a summer Friday like a bomb, Trump losing all those national injunctions. Now the court says no more national injunctions. Is it on the level? Is it partisan? My breakdown, first I've been able to give since I was off Friday, and Professor Murray here next.
It looks like this is a win, and putting a limit on these nationwide injunctions.
What I've seen does look like a victory for the Trump administration.
It is just the idea of this power of the executive branch that really is at issue here.
This is the ball game for President Trump's agenda, because we know more than any modern president, he loves to govern through executive action.
Big news coming in there. Now, President Trump has faced many court losses and setbacks among judges, district court judges, appeals court judges around the country. It's led to the freezes and the national injunctions against Trump policies where judges found them likely illegal. And headlines like the one you see on your screen and that have really been a regular part of this Trump era. Indeed, it's common across Trump's first 160 days or so that he has bluntly tested how far he can go. And thus, as you see from the voluminous number of red X's there, he's gotten more smackdowns than other presidents in both parties. That is what we've been living through in the courts. And now, in response to those very court losses, Republicans on the high court just gave Trump this unusual win, limiting lower court judges on how and when they can pause a presidential policy, even when judges or ultimately the Supreme Court find that policy is illegal. Typically, lower courts say that it's likely illegal and they have a measurement for that. And ultimately, if it goes all the way up there, the Supreme Court rules on it. And so things that are likely illegal are paused in the meantime. That makes sense because you don't want people to get away with the court's slow process to do the illegal thing for a year or two before they finally catch up with it at the high court. So that's just describing this in plain English. But this new decision, which came down from the Supreme Court Friday, changes the standard rules which govern the president, which governed Trump, which governed Biden before him. And that's why, before I get into any other details, I'll just tell you up top, it's another sign of how this MAGA-friendly court, with Republican and Trump-appointed justices, will blatantly change rules and even make up new rules for Trump's benefit. And then consider this. I'm not going to read a ton of quotes from this ruling, just a few, but even the Republican justices who just changed the rules for Trump acknowledge how a president like Trump can be caught pushing unlawful policies. So it's Trump appointee Amy Coney Barrett who wrote this new ruling Friday, noting in the ruling that when a court concludes the president has acted unlawfully, the answer is still not for the court to exceed its power to. Barrett using the decision to make up new rules for what exceeds power means. Before Friday, I'll just tell it to you straight. Judges routinely issued these national freezes on presidential policies when they found the policy was likely to be deemed illegal. Barrett herself and her colleagues routinely oversaw that approach. They're a part of the thing that they now say suddenly exceeds power because of their new rules for Trump. Now they claim that this new made-up rule is the better way to go. And so their past approach, by their own definition, exceeded the power allowed under the new rule they made up. Now, if Barrett or Justice Roberts cared about logic or being consistent and having a legal reputation that was credible, they'd be able to see that that looks really illogical and inconsistent. What non-lawyers would call being a total hypocrite. And critics say these masks of nonpartisanship, the things we hear about the independent court, have clearly fallen. Critics say this MAGA court will, as we saw Friday, risk professional embarrassment, looking bad, hypocritical, if it just helps Trump get any extra leeway to do what he wants. And those critiques have come from legal experts, from constitutional scholars, from elected Democrats, and the dissenters in this decision. Take Justices Jackson and Sotomayor, who dissented to this Friday ruling while noting the majority's approach is an attack on our system of law itself, an existential threat to the rule of law. Those are the strongest types of objections you get from lawyers. And I know we live in an era of hot takes and the internet and TikTok and everybody saying everything, but those are lawyers turned judges, of course, when they put on the robes, speaking as sweepingly as lawyers ever do. because they talk in a certain way and judges talk in a certain way. So when they say this is bigger than this case, we're talking about the whole rule of law itself in this country at this time, dealing with this president who's putting Marines in the streets and clashing over the National Guard. Well, you could believe their warnings or not. Now, when this news came down Friday, there were plenty of legal experts and journalists who noted that the MAGA majority's new help for Trump is sweeping. This isn't bound to the topic of this case, immigration debates. And that's a topic in this case in the definition of citizenship where Trump has already lost several rounds in the lower courts. This would affect everything, will affect everything, as long as we have this limit on what courts can do. Now, in those lower courts, Trump's lawyers have been trying to toss, ignore, and rewrite the original words of the Constitution. And they've been trying to throw that out and insert Trump's claim that people born here, he says, should no longer be counted as citizens, even though they always were. That approach has no precedent. You can't point to a prior case that supports it. It obviously runs against the word's original meaning in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. I mention that because this new Friday decision rewrites the current standard, but then oddly claims that it's drawing on the original meanings and words that were applied back in the day, and it says are not being applied now with the injunctions. And if you don't want to get into all the weeds, that's fine. I'll just show you a high point example. Justice Barrett claims that she took an originalist approach in the new case, that she's only concerned about history, even as they ignore the obvious originalist history of what it means. If you're born here, you're a citizen here. So in the Friday ruling, Justice Barrett says if you go back far enough, when the country was smaller, when life was different, there were not national injunctions available at the founding period. So Republicans say, yeah, that used to be different. The dissenters, by contrast, said the fairest thing is to just leave the rules as they are, meaning don't change them for Trump, which is why you see those three justices who voted against what Trump wanted Friday. The same MAGA judges who have been perfectly okay with the same sweeping national injunctions over the 4 years that Biden faced them now say this is a terrible problem. There are some court cases that are complicated. There are some where the fair result based on the evidence we have might cut against what you'd want in your politics, and it's the job of honest legal experts, honest journalists to explain why that works that way. This ain't one of those times. These same judges just last year were fine with these national injunctions when they were used to slow down Biden, to trim Biden policies on COVID, to go against his more liberal or progressive approaches to try to deal with the student loan debt crisis. And back then, these same judges stopped the student loan plan entirely for Biden, but they left in place those national injunctions. Indeed, back then, that ruling against Biden was to curb presidential power that he used. Times report, we checked, noted it that way back then. And so if you don't remember anything else about this, don't worry about the 14th Amendment, the talk of originalism. Just keep in mind the obvious fact, which is embarrassing for the MAGA justices. That's what they're acting like, so that's what they sometimes will be called in cases when they rule as MAGA justices. What was fine to legally slow down Biden last year is now suddenly unacceptable for slowing down Trump, and they want you to believe it's because they went back in the history books and read a bunch of stuff from 200 years ago. It looks like a partisan double standard because it is. And that's before you get to the legal fact that this President Trump has lost more lower court rounds at this point in his term than Biden did at his. In other words, the yellow light for Biden was fine with them nationally, and the yellow light for Trump is not, even though Biden was driving slower. Now, more broadly, there is data that shows judges have been using these national injunctions more often. And you could deal with that trend in any number of ways. But the MAGA majority only deemed this a problem when it bothered Trump. And Justice Barrett, who has at times sided with Justice Roberts on fundamental baseline protections of aspects of the rule of law, is clearly not concerned about how this all looks now, with a recent turn that is viewed by some experts as the kind of extraordinary turnaround that shows she's solidly to the right, and not just on legal philosophy, but on what are the mounting Trump-era litmus tests for our world right now and our country's democracy. Because if you're going to say what Trump is doing is okay, the status quo won't work. You have to change the rules. You have to allow more likely illegal behavior with no national slowing down, no yellow light. You have to do that even at the cost of accountability, of the role of judges' power, which is something judges tend to protect more often, and perhaps even for accountable democracy itself. So where are we now? Well, as always, dealing directly with the facts is the most important thing first, especially at a time where your government is hiding the facts and the judges, for various reasons, including their own sort of legalized judicial propaganda about how they landed this decision, pay no attention to the guy in the Oval Office who appointed me. This is strictly because I've been in the library with the history books. Well, we can start with the facts, and then we turn to what's going to happen with the law if there will be still rule of law in this great nation. For those questions, we turn to Professor Melissa Murray, who joins us when we come back. We're back with NYU Law Professor Melissa Murray. Your thoughts on this big Supreme Court ruling that changes the rules basically in Trump's favor?
No, it's a great point that you make, Ari. It is worth noting that the Biden administration had many nationwide injunctions leveled against it for many of its policy priorities. And the Biden administration also asked the Supreme Court to take up the question of whether nationwide injunctions had to be narrowed as a judicial remedy. And the court repeatedly denied those requests to take up the issue. So I recall being somewhat surprised when just 5 months into this new Trump administration that the court was suddenly bestirred to take up this question. And obviously now they have issued a decision that really does limit the availability of nationwide injunctions. It doesn't take them off the table entirely, but certainly makes it much harder for nationwide injunctions to be issued and really forces litigants into other.
We'll let you, before you jump to anything else, we'll let you finish the point, but here's the chart which we have to the point we're discussing. There has been an increase in the injunctions nationwide. That's the yellow light I talked about. But it's very clear over 4 years, Trump was way up. Here inside a year, he's already passed what would be half of what he did in all 4 years last time. Biden over 20. Those were on some issues that Biden folks cared about, and on you go. And so I'm curious what you think of the claim that Barrett would have us believe, that she is a strict originalist, but only when originalism helps Donald Trump.
So I think Justice Barrett's originalism, like much of the originalism that is practiced at the court, is often selective and itinerant. It is true that universal injunctions have expanded over time. They would have been unfamiliar to the framers, but indeed, much of what government today does would have been unfamiliar to the framers. And in fact, Neela Sahoni at Stanford Law School has shown that the universal injunction emerges at roughly the same time that the government expands because of the administrative state, because of the uptick in executive orders. Much of what Donald Trump has been doing as president, the flurry of executive orders that have been issued in just the first 6 months of this administration, would have been unfamiliar to the framers. So the idea that the real problem here is the nationwide injunction, as opposed to the nationwide injunction as a remedy to executive overreach that would have been grossly unfamiliar to the framers, I think really does miss the point a bit.
So what happens for district judges who see something really extreme, say it's not 700 Marines, say it's 7,000 or 70,000, or they're posted outside voting places picked for partisan reasons a couple weeks out from the election? What is a district court judge to do federally under this new ruling?
So the court leaves open 3 avenues. The first is that you can have a nationwide injunction if nationwide or universal relief would be necessary to give complete relief to the litigant who is before the court at that time. So that's a very narrow subset of cases. And of course, the courts get to decide whether complete relief is necessary in the form of a universal remedy. The second avenue that's available is the prospect of a class action. And, George Conway and I got into this the other night on Chris Hayes' show. I think this is not the panacea that some people are making out to be. Class actions are not available to all kinds of litigants. They're only available to individuals. They're not available to state as litigants. They're not available to organizations as litigants. And more importantly, the Supreme Court has, since the 2010s, really narrowed the circumstances under which classes can be certified. So it's much harder to present a class action and have it certified. And again, we just heard today that Solicitor General John Sauer in the Department of Justice is challenging the certification of the classes that were formed in the wake of the court's decision on Friday. So litigants that were forming class actions, as suggested by the court, are now being challenged in those class actions. And then the third and final avenue for relief is to challenge some of these orders through the Administrative Procedures Act. That's a federal law that requires the administration to go through certain administrative procedures before they can actually issue certain kinds of executive action. So there are three very narrow procedural realms that litigants can proceed down now. But in circumstances like the birthright citizenship case, where it is so obvious that the executive order is patently unconstitutional, the idea that you would have to go through these litany of different kinds of hoops and jump through them to get relief is really somewhat absurd, when in fact this should just be knocked down because it is patently unconstitutional and we all know it.
Yeah, fair enough. Professor Murray, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
Appreciate it. Important story. And when we turn back from process to what's happening under these immigration powers, well, next we have a Marine Corps veteran whose wife was detained by ICE, interfering with their child rearing and raising questions about what these ICE policies are supposed to achieve. That veteran joins us next. Donald Trump's aggressive ICE raids and enforcement efforts have raised larger questions about what we mean when we talk about immigration in this country. While Trump and some other hardline candidates have talked about going after, for example, criminals, gang members, and we hear references to gang members, the reality of who is being targeted and detained is different. ICE raids have swept up many people who've been here for a long time, who are productive members of the community, who may have had at one point legal status or a type of acceptance in their community, people with jobs, businesses, and families who may, at a current juncture, not technically be documented. That list changes more when you go beyond categories and talk about each individual person. Consider the wife of a Marine Corps veteran who was breastfeeding their 3-month-old baby when she was just detained by ICE, immigration authorities, detaining Adrian Kluwat's wife, Paula, at a green card interview, again, an effort to maintain documented legal status, in New Orleans. He's recounted how she came to the U.S. as a teenager with her now estranged mother.
Family in Baton Rouge anxiously waiting to find out what happens next after ICE arrested a mother of 2.
Adrian says he drives the 3.5 hours twice a week so the kids can visit with their mother and the baby can nurse.
It's just terrible that they don't make exceptions for things like this. As this young man served his country honorably in the United States Marine Corps, and now they've taken his wife.
Joining us now is that Marine Corps veteran, Adrian Kluwat. I know your wife, as reported here, has been detained by ICE. Our thoughts go out to you and your family. Thanks for joining me right now. You can hear me all right? Adrian, can you hear me okay? I want to see if our tech is going through. I think, as people can see, I don't think Adrian has the benefit of even being able to hear me, so we don't want to keep him up too long if that's the case. We're going to work on our audio. It's an important story. You now have the baseline. I'm going to fit in a break and see if we can get Mr. Kluwat here on the other side. We'll be right back. We're back with Adrian Kluat, a Marine Corps veteran whose wife Paula was detained by ICE, a story we reported here moments ago. Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking. So, fixed our audio. Thank you for joining me. Tell us both what's happened to your wife and whether you think this is a fair use of federal powers.
So my wife was brought here by her mother when she was 14. They passed a credible fear test and were allowed entry into the country. She became homeless at 15. Her mom just kicked her out, left her to fend for herself, and skipped the asylum hearing in 2018. And the judge issued a removal order for the whole family. And my wife was not informed of this. She knew her visa had expired, but we were working to get her green card. And then a week before our green card interview, it's called a change of status, we found out about the removal order, and we tried to reschedule the appointment so we could handle it. And USCIS denied it. We showed up to the appointment like we were told to, and we were very truthful about everything. We passed the first portion, and then after the second interview, which we supposedly had passed, they sent us out to the waiting area for paperwork regarding our next appointment, where 3 ICE agents came out and detained my wife. She's now being held in Richwood Correctional, Monroe, Louisiana.
And do you think this is fair?
No, like I said, my wife was homeless. She's been here over 10 years, and she's just being forced to pay for the sins of her mother. My lawyer and I are both fighting this as hard as we can. We just submitted more paperwork, a motion to sever with a motion to reopen and a emergency stay of removal, which stops deportation, to the judge in California. So it'll be at least 2 weeks before I can get her out if everything gets approved on time.
Yeah. And with my apology, we have about 45 seconds left. We had some technical difficulties. You served your country. I'm sure you run into people who say that's great and credit you for that. What do you want to say to the leadership of your country, to the government about this?
Give the power to use discretion back to the enforcement and removal officers. It doesn't need to go as high as an immigration judge and the head of DHS.
Yeah. And that you think this is not the right use of the authority because they're not targeting the worst of the worst here based on what we know about this case.
No, they're targeting people at green card appointments, anyone they can get their hands on. It's supposed to be the criminals, right? That's what he was advertising when he campaigned.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And in closing, you mentioned not only did you serve your country, but you told us about how, and we checked the facts on this, your wife was going to the appointment with the government. These are signs of people trying to comply and be a part of the system, not people on the run. And yet that's also apparently being weaponized against them in enforcement. I'm out of time. I apologize for the timing, but Adrian Kluat, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And yes, it's ridiculous. Appreciate the time.
Yeah. Thank you. That does it for The Beat.